So I had my first startup in 97. Yeah, it was a web development business. And it was at that time, that I met another sort of fellow traveler in the startup community, in the web startup community in Hong Kong, called Yu, who is the executive chairman and co-founder of Animoca Brands. So he and I became friends. We were part of a small community of, I don't know, like 20 or 30 entrepreneurs, all trying to make web startups. We were all in our 20s, young, idealistic, and we knew that the internet was going to be a big thing, and we wanted to be a part of it.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Hash It Over podcast. This is a series presented by the Unchained Summit, which is coming back, by the way. I've just been told that it's coming back. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this kind of summit later on in the podcast towards the end. But if you want to find out more information, just go online, Unchained Summit. They're all over the place, social media. You should be able to obtain all the information from there. Now, we're back with yet another incredible session. And I know I keep saying incredible every single time, but truly speaking, I mean, each guest that we have on the show is incredible, one. And second, they bring their own kind of flair. They come from a different kind of background that really adds value and makes this show very diverse. And especially if you're into your kind of Web3 gaming, this is going to be for you. You're in for a treat, that's for sure. Robby Yung, thank you for coming into the show.
Thank you for having me.
When I first kind of received the information that I'm going to be speaking to you, I was like, Robby Yung, that rings a bell. And then I was like, there's an American singer,
Okay.
very lovey-dovey type of stuff by the name of Robby Yung.
Oh, I didn't know
so you're a
that.
celebrity.
I'm going to have to Google.
He was, I believe, called like the blue-eyed singer. He had a very kind of mesmerizing blue eyes. So yeah, just thought I would let you know.
Thank you.
All right, so Robby, CEO of Animoca Brands. I want to know, like everybody else on the show, right, a little bit more about your kind of early beginnings into the space. But it seems like every time we have a guest on the show, they do come from a very kind of diverse background, having done multiple things and ultimately getting into the kind of the Web3 space.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about your kind of early beginnings, that journey, and what ultimately drew you into the blockchain space.
Okay, no problem. So I've been in, what the bankers like to call TMT my whole career. So I started out in telecoms. I spent, I was building wireless telecom networks in Asia, everywhere from China to Indonesia. And then I discovered the web. This was in the mid-90s. So I had my first startup in 97. Yeah, it was a web development business. And it was at that time, that I met another sort of fellow traveler in the startup community, in the web startup community in Hong Kong, called Yu, who is the executive chairman and co-founder of Animoca Brands. So he and I became friends. We were part of a small community of, I don't know, like 20 or 30 entrepreneurs, all trying to make web startups. We were all in our 20s, young, idealistic, and we knew that the internet was going to be a big thing, and we wanted to be a part of it.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it was really exciting. But of course, being in your 20s and entrepreneurialism in terms of like tech and software was a relatively new thing at the time. Whereas these days, when I speak to students and stuff, you go to a university and you find half the students are already working on startups while they're in school, right? Whereas when I got out of school, everybody just expected that you tried to get a job at an accountancy firm or a bank or something like that. So I ran that business for a few years. Then after the internet bubble burst, I had to close the business because companies decided they didn't need websites anymore because they decided the internet was not going to be a thing after all in 2001. And so I started another company with some friends rolling up traditional media assets in China. So that's everything from magazines to TV, outdoor, and radio. And did that for about 10 years. We did a couple of IPOs out of that portfolio. And once I had exited, I got back in touch with Yat. Well, I mean, we remained friends, but he was working on a game company. So he started Animoca in 2009 when the smartphone, first launched pretty much, when the App Store launched. most people forget that actually the App Store on iOS only came out a year after the phone, because for the first year, anybody who bought that first iPhone just had the apps that came on it. There was no App Store.
Pretty useless.
Yeah. And so he was having actually a lot of success with this mobile games business. So I joined him. And we eventually took the business public in 2015. And then growth started to slow down industry-wide. You know, the market for smartphones was saturated. Most people, by 2017, most people had a smartphone in the world. And
are we talking about the BlackBerry?
No, I'm talking about iOS and Android.
Okay.
Right. And so then we were looking for areas of growth, and we looked at new technologies, and we looked at new geographies and demographics, and we hit upon blockchain because we met a small group with a hackathon project in Vancouver, and they had just written what would come to be known as the ERC 721 standard on Ethereum. So they had invented the NFT, the non-fungible token. This was in August of 2017. And that team later formed a company, and they became called Dapper Labs. And so we worked with them on their first product that featured an NFT, which was a game called CryptoKitties, which launched around Christmas time of 2017.
Wow, very impressive. Yeah. And this is truly incredible kind of example of kind of, I don't want to say failure, but you know, you guys have had your kind of slow times, you know, in the market, and, you know, not believing in your product, and then, you know, keeping, you know, behind.
Yes. If you, you know, hit it big with a success on your first try, best suggestion is to retire after that.
True. Very true.
Because these things, I mean, entrepreneurialism is a long road. It's a marathon, if anything. And I always recommend to people that your job as an entrepreneur is to survive until luck comes along, basically.
Yeah. I mean, you guys have definitely gone through all the ups and downs of the industry. And you guys, like Animoca, started in mobile gaming long before NFTs and metaverse were actually a thing, if anything. What would you say was kind of like the turning point when you guys realized that this was not just a hype, and those words or this kind of industry could redefine the landscape?
So I think the important lens here is actually you know, our youth, when Yat and I met during the Web 1 days, because it was at that time in those sort of 1997, 98 period where we, as young people, we knew that the internet, as I said, was going to become a big thing. And the question was just, how are you going to play it? What can you do to be a part of it, right? And so I started a web development business. Yat had an ISP. Those were the typical kind of picks and shovels businesses of getting people online. And we were, though, however, subject to, you know, market forces. But the other difference was we were young. We didn't have access to capital. We didn't have, you know, huge networks of contacts or anything, because we were just kids in our 20s.
Where were you guys based?
This was Hong Kong.
Okay.
This was Hong Kong. And also that kind of tech entrepreneurialism was not indigenous to Hong Kong. You know, in Hong Kong, Chinese parents expect you to go and join, you know, Price Waterhouse when you graduate from school and have a reliable, stable job, right?
So are Arab parents.
Yes, exactly the same. And so entrepreneurialism is not a popular path. And also it's very difficult to hire because before people take jobs, they generally ask their parents.
Yeah.
And then their parents are like, what? A game company? No, sorry. So I think we learned a lot at that time that influenced how we saw this new opportunity with blockchain in 2017. So after the CryptoKitties experience in early 2018, we made a very quick decision. So I think, you know, obviously meeting the CryptoKitties team and working on that was good fortune. We happened to meet the right people at the right moment in time. But a few months later, I think we can credit ourselves with making the decision to really basically pivot the whole business. We decided this is going to be the future of gaming, and we think this is going to be a really big thing. We think all gamers will have blockchain infrastructure in the games that they play, because it naturally makes sense. If you think about what gamers do, gamers buy virtual currency, They spend that virtual currency to buy virtual items, and this is learned behavior that gamers have had for over a decade, well over a decade. Since before mobile, they did it on PC and web. And so this freemium model of gaming has basically given an entire generation of gamers the idea that digital stuff has value, right? And so we don't have to explain to them that this digital stuff has value. They know it already. So if we tokenize it, then we just give them the actual property rights over their digital stuff, which technically they don't have today because it's a false promise when you pay for an in-app purchase that you're actually buying something that you own. You don't own it. You just license it. You can't sell it. You can't trade it. You can't, And so that was really easy for us. However, we also recognized that blockchain was going to be a transformational piece of tech for the internet generally. So I think one of the greatest things that I heard 2 years into our journey was the term Web3, because we were calling it blockchain before then, because I think Web3 is a wonderful, simple way to kind of impart the gravity of what we're working on here, right? And also
How would you define Web3? Sorry.
Sure, I would define Web3 as basically the ability to add ownership to the mix. So the loose definition of the Web 1, 2, 3 is Web 1 is the period where we read stuff on the internet and, whatever, all kinds of websites that companies make or news. Web 2 is the largely social media period when we have blogs and YouTube and things. So we read and write. So we start to become creators as well. And then now is Web 3 where we read, write, and we own, because actually we can transmit value back and forth. And this is a really, really powerful thing because actually the web itself was originally designed as a propaganda medium for the US Department of Defense. I mean, that was its original intent. It was designed to broadcast information widely and without the ability to stop it because it's decentralized. But it was never designed to do credit card transactions or something like that. So that wasn't inbuilt into the tech. It's terrible for that. We still have to check for the little padlock icon on our browsers to make sure that we're not sharing that we have a secure SSL and we're not sharing our confidential information. So we've made all of these adjustments to try to accommodate tech that actually was not fit for purpose. But blockchain fixes that. It's fundamentally built from the ground up for security and incredibly low cost. The fact that I can send you money, right, no matter from person to person anywhere in the world for a negligible fee is incredible, really. When you think of, how much it costs me to send money from my bank account to your bank account cross-border, it's crazy. It's criminal by comparison.
Very
so
true.
I think that part of Web3 is really important. And so for us, what we decided in 2018 was that this was going to be a big thing. And going back to the analogy of when we were in our 20s, the question we had to ask ourselves was, how are we going to play it? Are we just going to add this infrastructure into our games? Or do we think this is going to be such a transformational shift, like in the late 90s or in the late 2000s, that we can build a really big business out of this, maybe beyond gaming? And so what we started to do was not just build our core business, which is build games, but we started investing because we wanted to diversify outside of just games. So we started investing in companies that we worked with and then just generally companies in the space. And so today we now have a portfolio of about 640 companies that we've invested in across the space. And this is completely diversified across all categories. So we've invested in infrastructure, L1s, L2s, zero knowledge proof companies, DeFi protocols, RWAs, you name it. I mean, and obviously a lot of gaming. So gaming is still maybe 20% of the portfolio.
Mm-hmm. That's very impressive, looking at how yourself and your partner have kind of taken Animoca Brands into incredible heights, but how you have really adapted and changed the scope of the business. And it's truly fascinating because we were just talking about the project that I started in Web3 gaming and how I had a plan, but then you can have the best and the perfect plan, but then along the way, things are going to be different in reality. And, you have 100%. To adapt, you have to change, you have to be ready to kind of be thrown on the side and then come back on the main street. And it's just truly impressive how you guys have kind of done it. So,
well,
congrats.
I think as we were saying earlier, it's much more a marathon than a sprint. And I think the key to all of this is to kind of have a long-term view on everything. It's like, we're in Web3 and crypto. I get asked all the time for people who want me to recommend tokens to them to buy, right? And I'm like, don't ask me what I could tell you. I have projects I could recommend to you that I think are great businesses, but I'm thinking with a minimum 2 or 3 year time horizon, if not a 5-year time horizon. Like, this is a great entrepreneur, they're building a great business, and they've got a token, and it'll go up because it's a great business. But don't trade it based on that information.
For sure, yeah. I've had my fair share of experience in the Web3 gaming, and one of the areas that I was kind of looking at is, of course, regulations, right? And building in Web3 means balancing your vision and your idea and your business model with regulation. From your experience, kind of operating globally, not just in Hong Kong, what lessons can governments take from regions that got it right or almost got it right, in your opinion?
Okay, so maybe I'll take that in the regulation in 2 pieces. One is gaming related, and the other one is Web3 related. So on the gaming related side, what we've observed, and we have a long history for this, is that gaming and the creative arts in general thrives in jurisdictions where there is strong government support. And I'll give you an example. So in places like the UK, Canada, Australia, France to a certain extent, Finland in a big way, all of these places have some kind of either government grant program or tax relief program to incentivize the creative industries, and specifically gaming. And these places are all hubs, because what happens is, as you well know, starting a game studio is a hard business, right? It's a risky proposition. The chances are the game you make will fail. And so to have the government help share some of that burden. So in the UK, for example, there's 25% tax relief. So it means your payroll burden is a little bit smaller, right, as a startup. And that means that you can then, feel a little bit more free to venture and say, okay, fine, I'll take that risk, because the risk is not quite as big and it's not all on me. And we see that. So if you go and see where all the game companies are situated, they're in Montreal, they're in Helsinki, they're in London, they're in these places that offer these incentives. So the incentives do draw them there. And the same thing is true in the film industry, where you see, at the end of the movie credits, you'll always see that they're in the same places. They're in Vancouver or the state of Georgia or somewhere where there are credits for these things. Now, the Web3 industry is different because we in Web3 are not drawn by grants or incentives. We're drawn by regulatory clarity over how our tokens are perceived.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the things that, I was actually at a conference in London yesterday. We had one of our big consumer Web3 conferences. And I was discussing this with people because there is obviously a close connection culturally and business-wise between London and Dubai, because lots of people move back and forth between these two cities. And I was speaking with a journalist, and I said to her, as much as British people like to complain, because it's a little bit cultural to complain about the weather and everything. And obviously, as a political issue, often people complain about taxes, because there are a lot of taxes in the UK. But I think one of the things that is often misperceived is that there are many entrepreneurs in the Web3 business who have moved from the UK to Dubai. And a lot of people think this is because they want to pay less tax, personal tax.
Well, that's what the media says.
That's what the media says. But it's not true in our industry, actually, right? The reason they move to Dubai is because if you run a Web3 business, if you are in the UAE, you have regulatory clarity around how your tokens are treated, right?
Do we, though?
Compared to the UK, absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
And so you can, for example, get a VARA license here for a virtual asset regulatory license, and you can have some regulatory clarity over how these digital assets are governed. And that's advantageous to running your business, right? It means you're not going to be subject to arbitrary enforcement. Because the thing is, I think we as an industry, we don't mind regulation. we're happy to have rules. We just need to know what they are, because a lack of rules means we have to assume the worst case scenario, and that's a terrible way to operate. And you ask any American company in the space from the last 4 or 5 years, and they'll tell you it's horrible because you have a cloud hanging over you that you don't know if you'll get a knock on the door and say, oh, actually, what you're doing is illegal, you know? So I think, when it comes to that, you'll see the Web3 community has also done a bit of jurisdictional arbitrage where they have located themselves in cities or countries around the world that provide that kind of clarity. I mean, Switzerland is another obvious, center for that.
I mean, I would truly advise anybody who's watching right now, before starting a business in the Web3 space, whether it has to do with gaming or tokens, do your due diligence. It's a big chunk of your pocket that's gonna potentially maybe drain you. So do your due diligence, understand the cost behind, obtaining licenses, make sure you're on the right track, because they're gonna knock on the door at some point in your career. You know what I mean? We've spoken about your early beginnings, kind of Animoca, the portfolio that you guys have. What is it that you guys do? I want to talk about the metaverse, right? The metaverse, and I'm sure you guys have either ventured or spoke about it. It was definitely a topic that was discussed at some point in a meeting. It had, I would say, its big moment and then fully disappeared. Do you think it was, I don't know if it failed, one, but do you think it was a bit too much for people to understand and absorb, and now it's vanished? Or has the metaverse taken a step back and now it's evolving slowly into the space?
So I think it's about framing and it's about product, because the metaverse is not dissimilar to AI in that respect, because it's a term that means different things to different people.
But AI is easy.
Yes and no.
Use.
Yes and no, because if you ask a real hardcore AI person, then a chatbot is not AI to them.
Yeah, but I'm talking about from an end user perspective.
Yes.
They're like, oh, ChatGPT, I can ask him anything, or her, or it, or whatever.
Yes. And so I think the metaverse depends a little bit on definition. So for example, if you spend, as a person in Web3 media, if you spend 4 or 5 hours a day on Twitter and crypto Twitter, then is that the metaverse? Because you're in an alternative digital space socializing with everybody. So I think that the metaverse in the hype phase of it was also largely defined by the biggest player in the space, or purported player in the space, which was Facebook, who changed the name of the company to Metaverse, right? And Facebook had a very, very specific goal, which was to promulgate VR technology. So their definition of the metaverse was around virtual reality headsets. And we always felt that the metaverse was slightly different. Our goal of building a metaverse was building a shared online space where we can all own our own digital stuff, right? Because we think if the metaverse is a virtual world, it has virtual real estate, and we should own it, because we don't want to have a virtual world that actually belongs to Facebook and we all just pay rent to go and hang out there. And so for us, we built products like the Sandbox, for example, as virtual worlds where everybody could buy their own land, build things on their own land, and have ownership of it. So coming at it selfishly from a Web3 perspective, we define the metaverse around the idea of digital property rights. And I think that this, first of all, the dream still exists, and we're still trying to pursue this. But I think that it's about a shared online experience. And the way I always try to define the metaverse to people is Web3 is brilliant because it facilitates interoperability between stuff that we build, right? And I think the goal of the metaverse, in my view, is very similar to thinking about what we call the web, right? The web is the aggregation of all the stuff that we all do online. It's not a single place, but it's a community where anybody can have their own piece of this shared space. And I think the metaverse should be the same. It shouldn't be one big platform run by one or a couple of companies. It should be basically a set of standards by which anybody can join this experience and make their own thing. And so in building the sandbox, we felt that here we had a project, we have a project that is probably the leader in the metaverse space. We have a brilliant, $1 billion token associated with it. But I don't want the sandbox to just be the metaverse. The goal is, if you think about the analogy of the world and the metaverse is the world, I want sandbox to be, Dubai or New York or Tokyo. I want it to be a really important city, but it's not the whole story. Because there will be many cities. It's a big world, and there are, there will be metaverses in Hindi and Chinese and Urdu and whatever, right? Because cultures have their own experiences and they will bring those online. But the goal is, in calling it the metaverse, we want them all to interconnect. And that's the key. Because imagine, we have huge communities in gaming, for example, in Fortnite, in Roblox, in Minecraft, but they don't talk to each other. They're all walled in these little gardens. So the dream of the metaverse is to get everything to talk to each other.
You just spoke about the sandbox. They were one of the earliest believers in the metaverse. How hard do you think is it for them to kind of maintain conviction over metaverse when the general public kind of turned a bit skeptical on the whole idea of the metaverse?
So at its most simplest form, the sandbox is not actually that different from other big multiplayer online world games, with the exception of blockchain infrastructure. So, your Fortnites and Minecrafts and Robloxes, etc. But one of the big challenges for these experiences is that because there is blockchain infrastructure, it means that distribution of the game is very hard, because traditional distribution channels have historically been off limits to Web3 games. Right? The iOS and Android app stores, Steam, all of the places that people get digital content, digital game content, have all said no to Web3 games. Which means building an audience is hard, right? It's much harder. But yes, absolutely. The intention of Sandbox is to continue to build. We have, I think probably today around 4 or 5 million users. And I think that the goal is, and also it's important to think about how we measure success in a Web3. One of the biggest challenges for Web3 gaming generally has been that for a long time, Web3 games used Web2 metrics by which to judge their success. But I think that's completely wrong, because the dynamics and the dynamics of the games are completely different. So, for example, most Web2 games tend to be freemium these days. So they're free to play, and then people spend in-app. And the goal is to build a really big user acquisition funnel. So you pump in tens of millions of users into the top. They all come in free, and eventually you filter them down until you find the paying users. And the paying users spend, cents per month, US dollars. So 10 cents, 15 cents, because you've got millions of them. So it adds up to real money.
Right, yeah.
But Web3 games are different, right? Web3 games, you have ownership. And so because you have ownership, people tend to spend more money, right? It's just like if you rent a flat, right? And I ask you, how much are you going to spend to renovate your kitchen in your flat because it's looking a little bit old? And you say, well, maybe I'll put some paint, but I don't want to spend too much because it's just giving free money to my landlord. But if you own the flat, you say, oh, I'll renovate the kitchen because it's an investment. I will get it back when I sell my flat later, right? So you view the way in which you spend money in the experience completely differently when you own it, right? And we've observed that behavior in games. So rather than like in Sandbox, people don't spend cents, right? They spend dollars, tens of dollars, and in fact, the average user spends hundreds of dollars per month. Because their expectation is, if I'm buying land in Sandbox, this is real estate. Now, some people may speculate and think, oh, maybe I'll make money and get money back, right? But I think that this is misplaced because I think the dream of Web3 games, of why you want to own things in Web3 games, is because we actually want to get back to a place like in the 1970s and 80s when I was a kid and had my first video game console. You want to get to a place where you own the content again, because when I owned a game console with a cartridge in it, or, later people had games with DVDs and things, physical media, I owned that game. I could take that game and I could lend it to my friend. I could sell it to my other friend. I could even go to a shop on the high street and sell it at a discount as a secondhand item, right? It's old stuff.
Yeah.
We can't do that anymore now that we have digital distribution.
That's
I don't actually own that game for which I spend the same money and pay the company the same money as I did for the physical media, but now I don't own it. They've taken ownership away from me. I just want that back. So if I spend money in a Web3 game and I buy all these virtual assets, my expectation should be not that I will make money from those assets, but that there will be residual value because they're secondhand items, because all assets that we own have value. We can debate whether the value is high or low, but it has some value,
True.
You could sell the jacket off your back to somebody else for a discount because it's a secondhand piece of clothing. So we should have the same thing for our digital stuff. And I think that it's unfortunate because we had a sort of a big bubble back in 2021, 22. People, I think, got distracted by the fact that there were people making a lot of money from game assets. So it created a false expectation because actually the overall point that there is residual value created because all of a sudden now we have ownership and we went from no ownership to ownership, that's actually a great thing.
Yeah. You're the first guest that I've had on the show, and I've had quite a few, that didn't really drop the word AI until 28 minutes into the interview. Usually it takes 2 to 3 minutes before you drop the word AI, and we haven't really spoken about AI just yet. How do you see AI fitting into the vision of Animoca being, the champion of the open metaverse?
Sure. So I think AI fits in many different ways. Obviously, AI is a tool that we use throughout our business, whether it's to help us with game development or to analyze a VC portfolio. I mean, we'll all be using AI tools. That's a given. But I think more importantly, there is a philosophical question about AI, which we've seen. And Web3 began in 2008, with the Bitcoin white paper and the creation of blockchain, politically speaking, as a reaction to the financial crisis. Because the idea was to create money that was not controlled by central banks. And so therefore, a few people could not be in control of messing up everybody's lives, right? That was the idea. I think that spirit still is an undercurrent throughout all of Web3, that we like the idea of decentralization. We like the idea of permissionless assets. These are all really important core principles. What we're and also the idea of why we prefer Web3 to Web2 is it gets us out from under the thumb of centralized control. It's what we don't like about the big social media companies, or the fact that when we work on the internet, we generally have to pay a big tax to Apple and Google and Microsoft and the Magnificent Seven, so to speak. I think AI is facing a similar moment because the question we have is, do we want a future where this very critical technological innovation is controlled by only a few companies, and specifically West Coast American companies, right? And
very specific.
Because obviously they're leading that race, at least in terms of the where the money is, right? And so I think that where Web3 and AI come together is in this idea of open source models for AI and decentralized AI. With federated learning. So I think that when we start to integrate Web3 infrastructure together with AI, then we have a vision of an AI that can actually be not just a force for good for society, but something in which all of society can actually have a stake. Because one of the things about Web3 is, why do we love tokens? It gives us a stake in the network. It means that we are not just a passive participant being farmed for our personal data.
You own shares in the company.
Exactly. We have a stake in it, right? And the same thing should be true for AI. If I'm going to contribute all my personal information and as training data to this AI model, I should be compensated for that in some way, right?
It could come at a later stage.
Yeah, which means that it should be a public good. But I can tell you, looking at the sort of direction of traffic, I don't think that OpenAI is going to decide that it should be made into public ownership. They've already.
I mean, you have to pay money, if anything, to participate in an upgraded version of this AI mechanism.
Yes. And we have seen really interesting examples, particularly coming out of China, of decentralized AI models, things that are and ones that are open source. Because at the end of the day, I think one of the things in software generally that I've observed in the last 30 years is that the open source movement has actually provided some of the most amazing innovations. You know, because when to go back to those Web 1 days I was talking about, right? If you wanted to start a website or build a web business, you needed Oracle software or Microsoft software to run your servers, and that was it. And today, everybody in the world runs Linux, right?
For a young founder, like a developer entering the Web3 today, what would you say is a problem that is truly unsolved and one that you want to kind of like shed a light on, you wish more people would focus on?
That's a good question. I think that the problems that we think about these days most are
not necessarily a problem. It could be just a hurdle or like an obstacle.
I'd say the biggest hurdle is, particularly in Western society, people who are raised in Western culture with a sort of Western education have a cultural leaning where talking about money is considered to be impolite. And so because talking about money is impolite, it means that there's relatively little financial literacy in society in general, because people don't talk about money. It's not a topic of discussion. You sit around with your friends or your parents and say, oh, how much money do you make? And how are you saving? And where are you investing and stuff? You know, maybe a small percentage of the population might talk about that, but it's not something generally talked about. And so as a result, people don't really know how to manage their own finances. And one of the three things that Web3 does so well is it empowers us as individuals to be able to manage our own finances. And so if you're building a Web3 product and you need to onboard users, you need to figure out, we've complained in Web3 for years that the onboarding process is too difficult, right? That you have to go and create your own wallet for self-custody and click, all these things just in order to get into the experience. Whereas if I'm using my smartphone and I already have a Google or an Apple account, I download the app, 3 clicks, I'm spending money already. It's so straightforward. And so people have been accustomed to that very simple onboarding process because they forget, actually, this is an iPhone, I gave Apple all my personal information like 10 years ago. So they already know everything about me. I don't need to redo that whole KYC process and everything because it's already all there. So it's actually false simplicity, because if I had to onboard for the first time, it would be a hassle also. So in Web3, we have this onboarding problem. But the onboarding problem is also a strength, because one of the things that you notice with products is that the more investment somebody has in a product in terms of how hard it is to use or knowledge they had to acquire to use it, the stickier it is because they stay, right? So that's why all the people who were in crypto early are still around, because it was so hard to use and you had to learn all these things. You feel good about yourself that you get it done. You feel like an expert. And once you have that expert knowledge, you want to keep using it, right? If it was really easy to do and anybody can do it, oh, it's not interesting. I get bored. I move on. I try something else. So that investment of personal time brings you on the journey. So here, back to the question of what's the problem? How do you balance those two things? Because I can get a really sticky long-term customer if they have to do 20 different things to onboard to my process.
Right.
But that also weeds out 99% of the users. So really, should I just be having a 2-step onboarding process? Should I be, for example, not allowing self-custody and just make a wallet in the background, and don't call it a wallet, just make it look like a Google sign-in, So I think those questions of how to design that experience to bring more people into the Web3 sphere, I think we don't have the magic formula for that yet.
I'd love to have hours of, one-on-one kind of conversation with you about the space. Honestly, it's been kind of mind-blowing. all the information and the journey that you've gone through, but I don't want to keep you here for longer. I'm sure you've got other important things to do. And by the way, can I just say that he just landed in Dubai and he came straight from the airport to do this session. So I truly appreciate it, honestly. Unchained Summit, I was talking about it earlier, right? This show is presented by the Unchained Summit. It's coming back to Dubai. For someone who's attended countless amount of conferences and festivals and so on, what do you personally look for in an event? Or what would be a unique selling point that would draw your attention to attend the conference?
So first and foremost, it's about who else goes, because the main reason you are there is to meet other people. It's a gathering place. And so I think the best events tend to be the ones that are able to draw the right kind of crowd for you. And the answer is not always the same for everybody, because, you know, I might be in a BD position, so I want to meet people who are prospective clients, or I might be fundraising, so I want to meet potential investors. So, you know, there's not every cohort is the same for every attendee, but I think it's about going to an event and you know, your level of satisfaction with the event is, who did I meet there and did I have valuable meetings while I was there?
All right, fair enough, fair enough. We would love to have you, by the way, at the Unchained Summit in
Thank you.
May. I know it's still a few months away from now, but we'll talk about it when the time comes.
Fantastic.
But if you want to be a part of the Unchained Summit, just as I said earlier, log on to the Unchained Summit website. We're all over kind of social media, Twitter, Instagram, you name it, and you'll be able to find all the information you need. We always have a solid lineup of, you know, guests who come in and share their knowledge and expertise, which what a lot of people also look for, you know, because you don't always get to see these people sharing their peace of mind on stage very, very often. Now, before I let you go, there is a rapid fire question segment, right? We'll try to do this very quick.
Let's do it.
First question. The first Web3 project that truly blew your mind.
To be honest, the first time that my colleague, Yat, who's our co-founder, suggested to me that I should download a wallet, I should download MetaMask and just buy some crypto and, like, you know, try it out, right? Honestly, the first time you do a transaction and you buy something and then sell something, so I sold an NFT on OpenSea, that's it. You're hooked. Like, because honestly, and this is what I tell everybody about blockchain, right, and crypto, just try it. Because as soon as you do it or you send somebody else some money, you know, at a distance, you're like, wow, that was easy, actually. And I couldn't do that before. And you mean I just did that and I didn't pay any fees for it either? You know, it's magic, honestly. It doesn't matter what you do. Just the fact that you can do a transaction so easily is quite magical.
Until today, right, for non-crypto users, whenever I deal with a client and they invoice me and I go like, not necessarily in the blockchain or Web3 space, and I go like, hey, do you accept crypto by any chance? The second they go like, yeah, of course, I have a big smile on my face. Like, yes, you've just saved me money. It's easy. I can literally go, and I tend to process their payments faster because it's a 1 minute job to send, you know, payments across nowadays, adding them as a beneficiary and waiting for 4 hours until they get approved and having to pay all these fees. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Totally.
Right. A game that defined your childhood.
A game that defined my childhood. That's going to be a tough battle. I'd have to say Pac-Man.
The most, where did you used to play Pac-Man? Is it on the console or?
Yeah, on the stand-up at the arcade.
Oh, okay, the arcade, yeah. The most underrated Web3 founder or project right now?
The most underrated...
Maybe you've invested in it.
I'd say Elliptical, who does security. They're based in London, and they are incredible. They work with the FBI, Interpol, big exchanges, you know, big investment banks. They've been building, you know, without any fanfare for more than a decade. They grew out of Cambridge, but really strong team.
The boldest risk you've ever taken, either inside or outside of Animoca?
The boldest risk.
And from the conversation we've had, you've taken quite a bit of those.
I don't know. I guess it depends on your risk appetite. But I think, if anything, just deciding to become an entrepreneur is always a risk. And I think
Agreed.
that you have to think very, very carefully about it, because you need, as glamorized as it is sometimes, it's very, very hard.
From the outside, it might
Yes.
look all shiny.
And you have to be willing to do the hard work, because, it's very difficult and it takes a long time. And as I said, most people don't succeed. So you just need to be prepared for that. And I think, like with investing, you invest according to your budget. You don't overinvest, right? And I think the same is true with entrepreneurialism. Like, you have to give yourself a budget and a time horizon and say, I'm going to try this. If it doesn't work by this date, or once I've spent this amount of money, I need to move on and just,
I've done the exact same thing. You're absolutely right. If you weren't building in Web3, what would you be doing right now?
What would I be doing
Apart
right
from playing
now?
video games.
I'd say I'd probably still be in traditional media and advertising, because it's always been a love of mine. But
you've spent more than a decade in that.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, the fun part is always where the two converge. So I think I would probably be spending time on trying to figure out what's next for traditional media on the internet, because I think it's still finding its footing.
Yeah, but advertising, media, marketing, it goes hand in hand with what you do in the space. One of the biggest things that you look at when starting a project in the space is marketing.
Absolutely.
Right? How to gain users.
Absolutely.
Through marketing. A startup pitch, and I'm sure you've had your fair share of people pitching projects to you. A startup pitch you will never forget.
A startup pitch I'll never forget. Oh my God, I've heard so many startup pitches.
Something insanely good or bad.
So honestly, I'm not going to name one pitch, because it's a trend, and it's something that I noticed during the pandemic. So when we were all locked down, I did 10 Zoom calls a day or 20 Zoom calls a day, just because we were investing, right? And everybody was working from home. And it was the early days of
You were
crypto.
investing in the time when everybody was a bit
Yes.
kind of conservative.
Yes.
But that's a good time to invest.
It was a
if you
good
have the
time to
cash for it.
invest. But the funny thing I kept noticing was, when asking founders about their background, something that I'd never heard before kept coming up. Two things. When talking about how did you discover crypto, there were two experiences that seemed to be quite common. One was, I used to play online poker professionally. And the other one was, I was in school and I was trying to figure out how to buy weed on the internet.
Really? I was born and raised here.
That didn't happen a lot.
Yeah.
But because I'd never ever heard that in my career before,
Okay.
to hear it from 5 or 6 people sounds like a really big cohort. Yeah.
I was born and raised in the UAE, so obviously these
Yes.
are not the kind of things I was exposed to. But yeah, usually when people ask me how did you get into crypto, I was like, yeah, through a friend.
So I learned, here's the fun story actually, from Hasib at Dragonfly about the poker part. So it turns out, for people who played online poker, either professionally or as a big recreation, in around 2015, 2016, bots started to play poker, and they started to become better at it, to the point where once you got closer to 2017, there wasn't so much alpha for professional poker players, because you couldn't tell which were the bots anymore, because the
Right.
bots got so good. So what happened was, the people who were playing online poker started to look for something else to do, and it turns out that crypto scratched that itch. And so a huge cohort of professional online poker players moved to
There you
crypto
go.
in 2017.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right, and lastly, to end the session, finish the sentence, the future of gaming is.
On-chain.
Okay, cool. Robby Yung, thank you very much, CEO of Animoca Brands. I'm guessing, I've looked you up online, you're on social media, right? LinkedIn. Are you
Yes.
active-ish?
I am. LinkedIn
Yeah.
and obviously Twitter, like all of us.
Yeah, that's true. Right, if you want to get hold of Robby for any particular reason, right? they're investing in a lot of projects, right?
We
In
do.
every segment of the spectrum that we've just really talked about. AI, metaverse, gaming, crypto, blockchain, security, whatever it may be. And yeah, stay up to date with Robby Yung about everything that has to do with Animoca Brands. Do you tend to share things that are outside of Animoca as well? Or
I do. Yeah, I try to. I try to. Yeah.
I need to follow you on Twitter. I haven't just yet. I apologize.
Good. We can
for
fix that.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Robby Yung. And if you didn't get the opportunity, you just stumbled across this session and you were like, I quite like what these guys are talking about. Well, not me, right? I'm just the interviewer. What he is talking about. Please, flip through all the sessions that we've had before. We've had some incredible speakers on the show from different kind of backgrounds. It is the Hash It Over podcast presented by the Unchained Summit, coming back to Dubai in May 1st and 2nd of 2026. Thank you for tuning in.